Welcome back to the vlog. In the last vlog, I took a look at Irish mills and also contemporary Irish knits and how one of those led on to the other and really started my whole interest in Irish yarn and Irish mills and just the whole industry, the yarn industry from start to finish in Ireland. So it made me realize that because I have been doing teaching, designing, and I suppose working with yarn a different sort for so many years, if you've only come across me over the last few years, you may not know of some of the other things that I've done along the way and a few of the other projects and yarns that I have. So I thought this might be a good way of, if it's new to you, introducing them to you, or if you're already, if you're somebody who's been following me for several years, then maybe just a little refresher on a project that came up a few years ago. So what I want to talk to you about today is my Nua yarn. This was the very first yarn that I did that was just mine, and something that I put together with Fibre from start to finish. It happened about kind of accidentally because Fibre, who was originally a hand-dyed company, now they're kind of a wholesaler and distributor for other dyed yarns that are done in Peru. But the person who runs it, Jenny, is a really, really talented hand dyer, which is how I actually managed to get the colors that I have here. Because while I know what colors I like and I know how to combine colors and I knew the range that I wanted to put together, I didn't know how to take what was in my head and translate it into the pile of yarn that I have over here. So that's actually where Jenny came in. So they had been distributing the my books, because I had a couple, and my patterns, my individual patterns, and I sometimes did trade shows with them. So there was one particular trade show where Coop Knits had started a yarn line. I'm like, oh, I'd love to do a yarn line. And Jenny just looked at me and said, you can, you know. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, I don't see why not. And that's kind of the start of Stolen Stitches Nua, believe it or not. So it was a very casual beginning, and it just came about as a, why not start the project? But once we actually got started on it, it was really exciting. So there was a couple of things that I came into for Nua yarn. There was two criteria that I wanted. The first one is I wanted a yarn that was not superwash, so a non-superwash yarn. Reason for this for me was because I knit so many garments, and superwash is not ideal for garments. Superwash has kind of got a coating on the yarn, which means that and it makes it a little slicker. It can't stick to each other, which means that you're not going to get pilling and you're not going to get it looking as worn or felted as quickly, but it also means that it doesn't hold its shape. Not such a big deal for small things or for shawls and things like that, but if you knit garments, that is a little problematic because you want your garment to hold its shape. So that was the first criteria I had, was I wanted something that was not superwash. So that was the starting place. And the second criteria I had was I wanted a sports weight yarn, because in Europe and particularly in Ireland, sports weight wasn't a really common yarn weight. But I found it quite useful for garment designs, because if you go to fingering or 4-ply, it's really quite fine. It takes a long time to knit, and so it's a little bit too fine for knitting garments. Whereas a DK and Aran weight, it was a little chunkier, and you're not always going to be able to get some of the finer details or slightly lighter weight garments in it. So for me, I really quite like wearing sports weight garments. In fact, the cardigan I'm wearing right now is sports weight. So it's warm enough that it's going to keep you warm, but it is a fine enough yarn that it's comfortable to wear in a larger amount of spaces. Because most of us now don't need a huge amount of heavier sweaters. Well, I do, because I'm cold. But most people keep their houses warmer than I do. And most people work in offices where it's actually more temperature controlled and a little bit higher temperature. So for those two cases, the requirements for very heavy yarn aren't really there. So I actually think sports weight garments are a really good one for general purpose use, where it's not too cold to be able to use it on a regular basis in office and things like that. So those were the two starting criteria. Then Jenny from Fibre and Andy from Chester Wool, the two of them work together. Fibre is now run by Chester Wool. They're kind of crisscrossed. So they came over with some samples and some ideas. We started with merino as the baseline, because merino is just a good workhorse. It's nice and soft, it's reasonably priced, so it's a good starting spot. So it began with baseline of merino, and then on top of that we had put a little bit of yak. Benefit of yak is it's really soft, a little bit different and unusual, and if I can find it here, this color here, see this, it's kind of a lighter brown, a beigey brown. This is actually the undyed color. This is Bare Necessities, and it's the undyed color of Nua. This is Nua Sport. There's also a worsted weight, but it started with Sport. And the reason the color starts out like this is because of the yak, because yak, when it's not bleached, has got this light brown color to it. So that means that you're no longer starting with a cream base. You're actually starting with this light brown base. And it had an interesting side effect, because it meant that when you over dye on a base that's this color, it changes each of the colors that you can dye. It means that unless you bleach it, you're not going to get a white or a cream yarn. It also means that there's certain colors that are never going to come out. You're not going to get really bright colors unless you go kind of a darker color in the brights. But like, you're not going to get pastel tones and things like that. And it automatically meant that the yarns I was dyeing had a natural cohesiveness, because when you start with this, as you're over dyeing, they all form a really nice basis for the colors. They just have a natural tendency to kind of to look well together. They compile well together. So those are the first two, and the last thing we put into it was linen. And the reason for linen is it's plant fiber, so we're mixing it in with animal fibers, and it doesn't adhere to the yarn as much as the others. So there's little bits of flecks come off, and it looks like a kind of, you can particularly see it in the darker colors. There's little flecks come off because it dyes differently. So linen dyes differently from animal fibers, which means that you've got a natural tweedy or multi-tonal color to the yarn when it's dyed, even though it's dyed a solid color. So it meant that we had much more interesting colors flecked through what would otherwise be quite a flat yarn color. So the two of those, they meant that the colors, when they were dyed, it just looks really rich and really interesting, with this lovely rustic subdued undertone to all of the colors. So that's how we kind of ended up picking the different fibers that went into it, and they all bring something to it. They enhance it, and they make it a little bit special rather than just a basic merino. You've got all of this richness and this really interesting color play together, just by virtue of the fibers. Now, that was kind of the baseline of the actual fibers that went into it. The next thing we had to decide was the colors that we were going to do. And for me, I wanted something where you had a good range of kind of basic neutrals, is the way I put them, that would form the backbone. And then the rest of the colors that went on top of that, I viewed as color pops. So it meant that you could have, say, I'll just pull up some of the more neutral ones here. Kind of view these as some of the more neutrally colors. And by having a little range from, this is coppled brown, this one is kitten fluff, which is a light gray. This one is the Bare Necessities, the undyed. Unexpected macaw, which is a blue, a kind of a light denim blue. And this is our August storms. So you've got like nice dark to light ranges of neutral colors. Then we paired these with, I went to see with this color yarn what kind of color pops could I get? Like how bright can you actually go with these colors? So we ended up with a good range of some nice pops of color. And you can see because of that undertone of this, they all look great together. You've got this lovely, lovely combination of neutrals and brights along here. So the ones you've got here is, this is Hatter's Teal Party. This is our, hang on, this one here is Cafe Flamingo. Frog on the Wall, which otherwise known as a grello, which I just love, and Rolling Bales. And you may notice something from the names. The names of these are pretty off the wall, and that is because we spent a long time shooting the breeze in terms of the names. It was when we were in holidays, and my husband loves naming stuff, so I'd say it reminds me of, like, for instance, this one here. I'm like, it's khaki, we've got army, I was just thinking forests, jungle. And so he just kept flicking stuff through at me. And one of the ones that ended up sticking, this became Mosquito Coast. So, and I think this is the one I'm wearing here actually, is the Mosquito Coast. So I think of it kind of as olive, drab, and khaki colors and things is what this elicited for me. Rolling Bales, you can probably see this is a very Bailey color. This is Harvest Moon because it's just a lovely kind of a pumpkiny orangey color. Here we have Figment. I'm trying to remember, I don't remember where Figment came from, this particular name. I'm sure it'll come back to me. There is one, oh, I don't have it here, but in the worsted weight, one of the names we have for a red is called Dare You. And that one came from a lipstick color that I just loved. What other ones here? This one is our Broken Tiles, which again is kind of a terracotta color. Here is Late Night Blues. So this is kind of, think of this as the indigo denim to the faded denim. So this is Unexpected Macaws, like your faded denim, and Late Night Blues is your kind of deeper indigo denim. Here we have a few of this is one of the newer colors that we've got here. It's another green, which I actually love this green. It's got a great depth. It's Sea Veggies. And I always think of these two as a pair. So you've got your light dusty pink, which I'm not a pink person normally, but oh, I love this dusty pink because it has that beigey undertone. It's got a bit more depth to it than you usually get. This one is Chalk and Plum, and again, these two together are just set my heart on fire. I just love these two pairing. And again, they're very subtle colors. It's a subtle color range, and it is primarily because they're dyed over your bare necessities. So I do sometimes get people coming and ask me for a cream color, and I'm like, it physically can't be done unless we went and I bleached this. It can't be done. And the same for, I had a couple of years ago, someone asked me for a true black, a black yarn. And I said, again, it can't be done because of the fact that the tweed or the linens that flex through are not going to take dye the same way. So you're always going to get a certain tweedy amount. So when you are looking at yarn colors and dyes and looking for particular colors from ranges, sometimes there are actual physical limitations based on the fibers that they're made up from. It is something that I learned along the way because I wouldn't have known a lot of this beforehand. I would have started off and said, oh yeah, yak and linen, that sounds wonderful. And it wasn't until we started getting samples in, getting them dyed up and all the rest, that it suddenly I became aware of the fact that the fiber choices going in impact how you can dye things, what you can dye them with, and what they're going to look like coming out the other end. And it's actually thanks to Jen that I got these colors like exactly where they wanted, because I knew what I wanted them to look like. But going in and saying that I want to get this purple to the actual mill, say this is what I want, give them a swatch, this is the color. So if they go and say, here, these are the dyes, I'm going to put it together, and they dye it on this, you end up with color combinations because you're starting off with the brown. So what you, particularly for things like this, what you put in is not necessarily what you would expect to from the outside. The dyes are going to have a different impact because of the fact that you're starting over with this. So it takes quite an amount of dye knowledge, color theory, and all the rest of it to be able to take a base like this and get the colors that you want. A lot of playing around, a lot of experimenting, and a lot of knowledge as to how colors work together. I don't have that because I'm not a dyer, and I'm unlikely to ever be a dyer. I just knew where we wanted to go to. So it's a very good example of collaborations where different people have different expertises and can combine together to produce a really amazing end outcome. So it's one of the reasons why I love when people play to their strengths, because you end up with a much more interesting end product or end game or whatever when people are all doing what they do best, rather than trying to shoehorn themselves into something that is not necessarily their strong point. Not saying that you can't learn new things, but people working together and collaborating can produce fantastic end results. And that's probably where this book, I had done a couple of Nua collections, smaller collections, which is where this one came from. This is the second collection. So I did a couple of those smaller ones where there was a few patterns together using the Nua sport yarn. And then I decided to kind of up the game a small bit and bring in collaborators and put together a more substantial book. And that's where Echoes of Heather and Stone came from. And it ended up being a much bigger project than I anticipated, because the idea behind it was I wanted it to be Irish, Celtic, but taking inspiration kind of from old Ireland, as opposed to me going, oh, I want lots of cables. That was specifically not what I wanted. I wanted the idea of historical Ireland, inspiration from that history. And what we came up with is just phenomenal. So the designers that worked on it with me, we had Lucy Haig, Isabella Kramer, Justine, Amanda, Kerry, Jennifer, and Woolly Wormhead, and me. And everyone did one design, and it was a mix between different garments and different accessories. And like I didn't set a difficulty level. So we've actually got a few projects in here that are, I would say, almost aspirational and really, really interesting. The cover one, that was Lucy Haig, and it's Newgrange. So you can kind of see it here. It is a Newgrange shawl, and it's just truly, truly a fantastic example of what you can do with knitting. I went into the initial edit on the pattern, and while I could see what she was trying to do, I had a very hard time visualizing how it went together. And it meant that I actually went and I knit the pattern myself, simply because I felt the need to work through it to really, really understand it. So this here is the diagram of it, and it probably gives you a pretty good idea of how it fits together. It's got each of these panels. There's one where there's just see these little spirals. I might open it up here on the front to see if I can find a full range. There's each of these small spirals, and you knit those separately. So you've got one in the middle, then you've got 3, and then you've got 5. So all of those, there's 9 of them knit, and they're all done with short rows from side to side where you graft them together at the end. So it's a series of cable ribbing and short rows that work around in a spiral, and then you graft them together, and you make each of those together individually. Then you pick up stitches around them, and the first one is just one, and with short rows and cabling you actually fill in the triangle shapes. So that you've got the 3 strips, one with a single spiral, the next one with 3, and the next with 5, with all of the spaces filled in around them. And then at that point you pick up stitches along each side, and working back and forth, picking up stitches on each side, you fill in the stockinette stitch panels. It was phenomenal. It was not an easy one to work. There was a lot of techniques, but it was well worth it, because it kept me fascinated from start to finish. And it's probably one of the last designs from someone else that I've knit from start to finish, and I couldn't wait to finish it because it was so interesting. On the back here, that one is Shamrock, by Justina. Let's see if I can find the picture on the inside here. And it's actually proved a very, very popular one because it's a very, very wearable sweater. I cannot find it, but we will pop a photograph of it up on the front of it. But the garment was just really, really interesting. It was very delicate texture stitch patterns and a cowl to go with it. And the cowl in this yarn, it flows really easily, and it's a really very wearable piece. The next one that I would say kind of fell into the aspirational category was Talamh, which is the Irish for ground. So this is the front of it here, and that Amanda did that one, and it is phenomenal. There is multiple colors. It is all this huge worked over a garter stitch background. You've got slip stitch cables that zigzag back and forth over the back of this. In the book, I've obviously, these ones here, I've got all of the charts. There is a ton of charts, but because they didn't all fit in here, every one of these came with the digital download, so that if someone preferred written directions, all of the written directions for those huge charts were all in the digital package, just an appendix to it. Same with the Lucy Haig one. This has just got the charts, but then the digital version has got all of those. But yeah, I think Amanda and Lucy's are the two majorly aspirational pieces. Ahini, this one is Jennifer Wood, is Ahini, and it is a very, very reminiscent of Jennifer Wood. It's got very intricate cables, tightly packed, but just kind of featured up here. Very carefully shaped garments, because she tends to have very fitted garments, very nicely shaped. Big panel down the back, and there's a nice little feature down the side where there's cables running down each side, and then there's some shaping in between the cables. But it's a really, really elegant little piece. Probably won't come as much a surprise to anybody, but the Woolly Wormhead, she has got a hat in here. Yes, she has a hat, and it's garter stitch with short rows worked from side to side, which is one of her favorite features. And it's worked to look, you can actually see the arch that we've got it pictured next to here is very much reminiscent of it. It's kind of got a Norman helmet style is what it feels like, with a little cross in the front. So very subtle, very much historically based pattern. This one is mine here, and this one is Epona. So it's a side-to-side cowl, circular, and again, this is not obviously Newgrange, but it's taking some of those other carvings. You'd see a lot of spirals, and it's just doing very simple color work, alternating between two complementary colors in a tube going around, and then you graft the start and the end of that together. So probably a good one if you're new to color work, because it's fairly simple, it's repetitive, so you can see what's happening easily. And I discovered with this as well that Nua Sport works really, really well for colour work, because being non-superwash, the stitches have a little bit more softness, which means that it blends together, and so it's very forgiving is the best way to put it. And we've got also here, who else have I got to introduce? Isabella Kramer. This is, again, it also, the sweater that she's got for this is Anya. You can see this one here. It's very classic Isabella Kramer. It's top down garment, circular yoke with color work. And the feature on that is it reminds me of the one that Woolly Wormhead did, where the hat is kind of a helmet shaped one from the Norman era, and this one is taking that, but just taking and creating a little color work repeated motif all the way through. This one, when I modeled it, I did it over a really loose dress because it had this big oversized flowing shape to it. And in fact, this may have kind of set me on a slightly different garment route, because I had been doing very, very fitted, kind of small sized garments, and this one is quite oversized. And when I put it on, I'm like, oh, this is really comfy. And I think it may have gotten me started on my move towards a little bit more oversized, a little bit more loose fitting, a bit more forgiving from an ease point of view. They're more comfortable to wear. I feel like you can wear them with more things, and also one particular size range will do a bigger range of sizes, because people can opt If you want to have it fitted, you can come down the sizes, so you can still do that. By having it photographed on something a little bit bigger, you can also see what it looks like a small bit bigger. So it kind of got me to, I suppose, reevaluate the sizing that I use on garments and think a little bit differently about how I sized garments. So that's a big advantage of working with a big range of designers like this, like such talented designers, and everyone bringing a completely different perspective into the book. And their design process is quite different as well. So like the one I haven't looked at here is Kerry Westerman, and Noth is what she has worked on here, which is a shawl where it's top-down shawl, where you've got, again, the inspiration for the middle of it. If I remember correctly, I think it was also similar to like some of the older carvings and things like that, with slip stitch color work, and then finishing off with an applied edging, kind of very wide edging, where you've got the cables running all the way along the edge in a second color. And so the way she designed that and the applied edging, again, something I had done, but I hadn't done it with such a big wide one. So working through these projects with designers like this, which was the first time I had done a big compilation project, I discovered that it challenged the way I designed. It challenged my thinking as to this is how you do this, and opened my mind up to a whole range of ways that you can design and the ways that you can think about designing. So it was an eye-opener from a design point of view for me, and it took me out of my little insular view of design and just how I did it, and really opened it up to the possibilities for me of a huge range of ways that you could do it. So I'm realizing as I talk through everything here, between the Nua Yarn, the Echoes of Heather and Stone, the theme for this vlog is all about collaboration, and is thinking about all of the benefits of working with other people who are really talented and have got bring something different to the table than you do each time, because it ends up meaning that you learn something new. You are actually stretching yourself with the way you think about yarn, about design, about inspiration. That, like, for me, I look at shape. I tend to be very practical. I look at shapes, fit, how it flows together, construction, that kind of thing is what I'm focused on. And I don't as often take it a higher level up, where I'm like, looking at sunsets, historical features, things like that, and then reinterpreting that from a design point of view. I am less likely to do that, because but working with designers that operate that way, and much prefer having an overarching view, isn't the right word, I suppose, just inspiration, a starting inspiration at a higher level, was a good added perspective for me, and I think it enhanced my design kind of going forward from that place. So hopefully in the next few years I'll have a few more collaborations, and I'll pull some other bigger projects like this together, because they're hard work, but you come out with a product that you can hold in your hand and love for years to come. So that's it from me today. I think from my vlog, I've probably exhausted what I'm talking about. I'll see you on the next one. If there's anything in particular you would like to hear about, let me know. If you want to make sure you don't miss the next one, make sure you hit subscribe, and that way you'll be notified as soon as it goes live. Thanks for watching.